inform you about animals in captivity and their mental health. There is a significant amount of evidence that animals in captivity experience a rapid decrease in health compared to their wild counterparts. In captivity, animals live a relatively shorter lifespan than their species who live in the wild. For instance, wild elephants typically live to be 60 to 70 years of age, while captive elephants are found to only live around 40 years. The comparison of lifespans between captive animals and animals in the wild is astounding. Today, we will analyze the evidence collected over a number of years that correlate animals and their health in captivity versus the wild. Humans use captivity in animals for conservation or educational purposes. However, a majority of animals in captivity, more specifically in zoos, are not on the endangered list, and the percent that get released back into the wild is relatively low. So there aren't actual valid efforts toward the conservation of these animals. After elaborately searching through articles and valuable websites regarding the captivity of animals, I have gained so much knowledge on the effects captivity has on animals. To have a greater understanding of animals in captivity, it is necessary to consider the purposes of animals being held captive, the behavior and health of the animals, and finally, the habitats of the animals and the effects it has on them. Let's begin by considering the purposes of animals being held captive. Animals in captivity are typically used for conservation, but have been seen more as a source of profit. Most animals held captive cannot be justified for the use of conservation. In fact, a study done in 2011 found that zoos in North America invested less than 5% of their income into conservation. Most animals held captive in places like zoos aren't even featured on the endangered species list, and the few that are tend to be released back into the wild after being rehabilitated. Tend to not be released, A study found in the Journal of PLOS One found that only 18% of animals in zoos are actually endangered. Even so, efforts to release the animals back into their habitat is diminished because being held captive for periods of time ruins their ability to live in the wild. This is because the animals begin to lack the survival skills they would need to be released. Captive release programs have a high rate of failure because the animals, once released, have poor foraging efforts and a lack of recognizing predators. The income from zoos primarily comes from the animals, so the result is breeding animals left and right to keep patrons coming. In 2014, a story covering a 2-year-old giraffe named Maurice hit the news and caused massive concern among many people. Maurice's species, the reticulated giraffe, is not on the endangered list. According to the Copenhagen Zoo, Maurice did not fit into the zoo's captive breeding program, so he was shot in the head by a veterinarian. Following his death, people visiting the zoo were permitted to watch and learn about giraffe anatomy as the vet butchered Maurice. The remains of Maurice were then fed to the lions at the zoo. Now that we know what animals in captivity are used for, we can look at the behaviors and health of animals held captive. Humans have one solid way to determine if an animal is happy, and that is by the animal showing a lack of stress. Since animals don't have the capability to tell someone how they are feeling, humans look at brain behaviors, measure the cortisol hormone levels, and adrenaline within an animal. Animals in captivity often show signs of depression and anxiety, so much so that the distress is called zoochosis. Zoochosis includes pacing and circling, over-grooming and self-mutilation, and vomiting, among many other symptoms. Captive animals show great decreases in health due to many things, such as lack of exercise or not being able to do their normal physical functions that they would need to be able to do in the wild. In 2015, Auckland Zoo euthanized a gibbon named Owani because he was severely depressed. The zoo admitted they could not meet his welfare needs. Another case featured a polar bear named Gus, who lived at the Central Park Zoo. Gus began compulsively swimming figure eights in his pool for up to 12 hours a day. An animal psychologist ruled that it was because Gus was bored. Gus was given behavioral therapy and prescribed Prozac, which is an antidepressant. Gus eventually died in captivity in 2013. We have now seen how the health of animals in captivity is affected, as well as their behaviors. Now, let's take a look at the habitats of animals in captivity and how it affects them. Animals have not evolved to live in man-made enclosures, so the ability to project normal behaviors is unlikely. Captive animals lack quality of sleep, display signs of boredom, and lack the willingness to play. This is due to the habitats being entirely too small and cannot replicate the life an animal would have in the wild. British zoologists found that tigers prefer a roaming range 18,000 times larger than the average zoo enclosure. For polar bears, it is 1 million times larger. Most animals in zoos lack the social relationships that they would form in the wild because they don't get to be exposed to any other animal besides their own species. Often the animals don't get that experience because their enclosure only features one animal. This especially affects animals who naturally live in herds. Today we have taken a look at the overall effects captivity has on animals. First, we analyzed why animals are primarily held captive. Second, we took a look at the behaviors and health animals in captivity exhibit. Finally, we gained knowledge on the habitats and the effects the habitats have on the captive animals. Animals in captivity is always going to be a phenomenon that won't die out. Animals being held captive makes for quite the profit among zoos around the world. However, anyone can be informed of what happens behind closed gates and how animals in captivity handle a lifestyle that was not made for them.